Hi everybody, this is Jenny Floria. We are on the first portion of the series dissecting the MPD 150 report. This report was put together by a group of community activists, organizers, and researchers, and they released it in 2017 on the 150th anniversary of the Minneapolis Police Department being founded. They did this to look at the past, the present, and what the future of the Minneapolis Police Department should look like. Now, granted, this is just looking at Minneapolis, but their point is that Minneapolis is not very different at all from a lot of cities and a lot of cities' police departments across America. Many of them are founded on the same bases. So this could be relevant to you and where you live and how public safety works in your area. So let's get started. I'm going to first dive into the past. So the first point they make in their introduction is that we like to think that the police have been around for a very, very long time. And indeed, they have. They've been around in this country for around 150 years. But in the history of humankind, the police really have not existed as a formed unit very much until the last 150 years. Ironically, early policing in America was made up of slave patrols. As you can imagine, this name is exactly what it sounds like. It was made of local militias and slave owners who patrolled the countryside, stopping blacks and forcing escaped slaves back into bondage. Now think about that. They were able to and had the authority to stop blacks, any black that they saw, for any reason, ask to see papers, see where they're going. This kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? So the first known police department was in London, founded in 1829. The Minneapolis Police Department was founded in 1867, 2 years after the 13th Amendment was signed and the end of the Civil War and the end of slavery. So let me just interject here. The report doesn't specifically state this, but after going through all this information, I can tell you, when you think about why the police was formed at that time, perhaps you're thinking, oh, well, they're here to help make sure that there's safety as these new families come into the area and help them get access to things and help them learn, here's how our education system works, and make sure that they aren't bothered by white supremacists who don't want them in their neighborhood. That is not why the police in Minneapolis were founded in 1867. They were founded to protect the interests of white business owners, and also because the whites feared retribution from blacks for having enslaved them. They were formed to protect whites who feared retaliatory violence. That is why the police department in Minneapolis was formed. So from 1867 to 1917, in the first 50 years, they were completely untrained, did not wear uniforms. They drank on duty so often that in 1875, the mayor of Minneapolis finally passed a law that said that a cop cannot enter a saloon while on duty. So one interesting thing about Minneapolis politics at the time is that Minneapolis mayors were elected every single year. They did not have multi-year terms. Every single time this happened, the mayor would placate his friends with jobs across the city and would oust his political opponents. Sometimes this resulted in a 100% turnover rate in the police department. The other thing that they also did was they would direct the police on which laws to enforce and which to not enforce. This also changed annually. So just imagine that you're living in the city of Minneapolis and we have laws like you can't put your horse next to this kind of station, or you're not allowed to spit on the sidewalk or something like that. So let's say you spit on the sidewalk one year and nobody does anything about it and everybody's doing it. It's like, well, whatever. And the next year you spit on the sidewalk and suddenly you're arrested for it and you're not exactly sure what you did wrong. Now add into that majority of blacks at this point, having been newly freed from slavery, were mostly illiterate. They had no idea how to read, what the laws were, why they were changing on what seemed like a daily basis. And as you can imagine, these laws that fluctuated on an annual basis were disproportionately enforced upon the newly freed blacks who were living in the city. The 13th Amendment, which freed the slaves in 1865, allowed for involuntary servitude. This is a really big loophole that the documentary 13th really digs into. This loophole says that it allows for involuntary servitude as a punishment for crime. Minneapolis made full use of this loophole. In 1886, the city's first workhouse was constructed. Now, during this time, the workhouse was disproportionately filled with blacks who had broken random laws that changed every single year, and their labor was used to farm, make clothing, and excavate quarries. These quarries then, and the materials that came from these quarries, built the buildings that are in our city and in our state. In the first 4 years after the workhouse was built, the city made almost $9,000 from inmate labor, which translates to about $244,000 today. It was quite a tidy sum. Around 1900, the Minneapolis Police Department used its increasing power on behalf of a group called Citizens Alliance. Citizens Alliance was a far-right group of powerful businessmen, and they used the police to harass, infiltrate, and attack labor groups. Police protected strike breakers and helped to crush strikes without any compromise from employers. From the streetcar strike to the machinist strike, labor had no chance in Minneapolis. So ironically, though, in 1917, at the end of this 50-year period that they're studying, the police established their own union with the American Federation of Labor. By the end of this year, 1917, there were 300 police officers exerting power and control over a city of 3,000.